Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We just want to take a minute to thank you for being here, and thank you to Brian Becker for joining us this morning. A few notes about today's session and the other sessions today. The sessions will be recorded and shared about 2 weeks after the conference, so keep an eye out for an email with that information. Presentation and reference materials are available on the sessions landing page, so definitely feel free to take notes, but if you want to reference something later, it will be available. We ask that you please use the Q&A box in Zoom to submit questions to the speakers. That prevents them from getting lost in the chat. The chat should really be used to share commentary or chat with other attendees or make comments about something being said. But questions posted in the chat will likely not get answered because they're kind of hard to find in there. So again, please use that Q&A. And so without further ado, welcome Brian, and I will hand it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Michelle. It's great to be with you this morning. Special thanks to Siebert for all the great things that they do in the Milwaukee area and throughout the Midwest. I've been associated with Siebert for more than 15 years and have attended many of these and their conferences over the years, and just really am grateful to be part of this. So in case make sure you're in the right session, this is about building the leadership capacity of your ministry. And just a sentence about my own background. About half of my working career, I worked for two mid and then large nonprofits in the executive areas, vice president, senior vice president, program director, different Christian ministries. And I've served on 6 or 7 different boards and been on a bunch of committees in my community and at my church. And so I, see this from both directions. And so I'm going to share with you today from my perspective, not only as a person who spent many years helping nonprofits, Christian ministries, congregations to build stronger boards, to build stronger committees, but also as a volunteer on the boards of those organizations. Just to get us started, I want to make sure that the Q&A is actually working. So you don't have to do this, but if you'd like to, just put in like the city you're in. So you're in Madison or wherever, and then just a short phrase, what would make this session really worthwhile for you? So where are you this morning? And what would make this session really worthwhile for you this morning? I'm just going to wait just a few seconds. And Michelle, if you want to read those back to us, that'd be great. I'm going to ask Michelle to field any kind of questions that come in this morning so I can focus on my material and she can help with the questions. So anybody putting anything in the Q&A there?
It is working. We have someone from Evansville, Crete, Illinois, learning how to better equip our leaders. And Pastor Italiano was a previous speaker at a Siebert conference. So welcome, Pastor. Someone's traveling and they're in Portland, Maine. Looking forward to learning about board development. We have learning how to empower my staff and council. Someone from Detroit, Michigan. Most important things to keep in mind as I'm building a multicultural bilingual leadership team. Church. Oh, Wauwatosa person, that's where I'm from. 3 tips to change 20 years of habits. Wow, that's very specific. Okay. So that'll be great. We have Chicago, Illinois. He's never really seen a strong board, so he's unsure what it looks like other than a formality group. That's really, I think, a good point there. We have from Milwaukee, growth of leadership when the few left are burned out. Yeah, that's a real issue. Clare, Wisconsin, board development. Someone in Brookfield, leadership, mentorship, and best practices.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Today is up and running.
Okay, so our 1 hour session is now going to be a half a day session, okay? So no, great questions, and it'll help me stay focused. We will have time here and there for those types of questions. And also I realize that when I ask myself a question, that helps me be sort of like a heat-seeking missile to try to solve those issues. So keeping those questions in your own mind, I think, can be helpful along the way. And I'm going to hide my own view because I don't need to look at myself. That distracts me. I'm going to start sharing my screen here. So you should see, welcome to building the leadership capacity of your ministry. So I'm making an assumption here just based on those questions that some of you have teams, ministry teams, And some of you have boards, as in you're a nonprofit or you're a congregation that you are a 501c3. In other words, you're a legal entity unto yourself. Also aware in the Lutheran world that some congregations are independent 501s, separate from their denomination. And in some denominations, all the congregations fall under the same nonprofit umbrella. So I'm going to use the term board today. But if you have a committee, I'm not leaving you out just so I can stay focused. I'm going to use the term board probably more than committee or team. So we have 55 minutes. We're going to move along, and we'll take if you have questions as we go through, put them in the Q&A, and we'll about halfway through we'll stop and grab some of those, and then we'll do the same at the very end. So when I was 16, I was a farm boy in Southern Illinois, and I worked part-time because I wanted to buy a 1946 Ford pickup truck. It wasn't this one, but it looked almost exactly like this. And I was working part-time, and I got my money saved up, and I went to test drive the truck. And it looked fantastic. I opened the door, I could smell the leather interior. It had been completely redone. Looked under the hood, beautiful motor, chrome wheels, started it up. It sounded great. We headed out onto the road for a test drive. And as soon as we pulled out of the parking lot, it didn't handle right. Something wasn't right. It didn't accelerate properly. It sounded right. It didn't corner right. It didn't brake right. We came back into I went there fully intending to buy the truck. And when I got back in the parking lot, I'm like, there's no way I'm going to buy this truck, even though it looked and sounded and smelled and everything great. And as I was closing the door, I noticed that the parking brake was set just a little bit. Now, if the parking brake is set a lot, it'll, smell and burn up the brakes and tires screech, but it was set just a little bit. And there was no way that truck could run the way that it was intended to, with all the love and hard work and everything to restore that pickup truck to its glory. There's no way it could run right with the brake set a little bit. And as I was thinking about putting this presentation together, I was thinking about all of those committees, all those teams, all those boardrooms around our country in good Christian ministries, where there are some people at the table that they're just not engaged, or maybe it's a mismatch for who's there, or for some reason they were there, maybe they're burned out, or maybe as a leader of the committee or the board, you're not feeling equipped to how do I really get them on, get the right people? And so if they're not engaged at the right level, it's like as if the parking brake is set a little bit. And so what we want to do today is I'm going to take a look at my own perspective from working with lots of nonprofits and being on boards to share with you a handful of ideas that I believe will help you to really build the leadership capacity. And so what I want to share with you next, 7 G's of highly effective boards. This is from my perspective. This isn't like if an attorney were speaking to you about effective. This is but my observation of being inside of dozens and dozens of nonprofits over the years. And the first thing that's really important is governing. If you're a nonprofit organization, as you probably are, you have bylaws, you have a constitution, you have certain regulations, rules policies that you need to follow. And it's up to the board to be good at governing and adapting a governance style or policy set that really work best for you. And that's a much, much longer conversation, but just know that governing is an important piece of what the boards do. Second is, I'm sure you've heard the term generative. How do you engage the board in a way that you can harness their experience, their skills, their passions in order to generate the type of information and problem solving and vision setting that help you, if you're the CEO of the organization, the executive director, the senior pastor, the chair of the board, whatever seat you're in, so that way you can really advance the organization and move it forward. The next thing is giving. Most of the organizations that I work with as a consultant, that's what I've been doing the last half a dozen years, they serve the public in some way. It sounds shallow to say that the congregation serves the public. they do. We'll leave it at that, even though it's an inadequate answer. Or you're a homeless shelter, or you feed hungry people, or you do literacy, after school programs, whatever that might be. And so you're giving to the community in some way. Resources go out to the community. The organization doesn't work without a diverse stream of revenue, fundraising, events, grants, whatever that might be. And so are the board members willing to use their social capital, their means, their resources, their connections to give to the organization, and at a significant level? And then are they willing to get? For some organizations, the most valuable thing that a board member can do is to help with their own connections. Maybe they know all of the city council people in the area, or they know people who could sponsor events, or they know foundations and they can help bring in dollars or connections, or willing to use their social capital in order to help get the organization what it needs to be stronger. Are they willing to go? 2 years ago, I was working with an organization in Chicagoland called Housing Forward, and they help homeless people get to transitional housing and then other types of care around them. And there was a new person on the board, and he said, "Oh, I've never been to one of the service centers." And I was like, "Wow, sir, that's like your next thing. Let's see if you can't set up a time when you can go to one of the service centers." As a board member, how can you effectively tell the story, understand the depth and the strength of the services that are provided unless you've been there? And so you encourage your board members to go, to be present, to volunteer, so that way they understand deep in their core how important the ministry is, the mission and the impact. And then the sixth thing is to get off the board. And I don't mean that like sarcastically. In a lot of organizations, you have term limits. You can serve three-year terms or something like that, or 2 4-year terms. And when your term is up, you get off the board and then help replace yourself with somebody who's as good or better than you. Or maybe you're on the board and your interest has changed, or your time has changed, or you can't serve the way you initially thought that you should. You're not a bad person. You just should move off the board and make space for somebody who could fully engage. You think about that picture of the pickup truck with the parking brake set. If you're serving well and then for some reason you can't, you're one of the reasons why the parking brake is now set a little bit. So move off the board and make space for other people. And then last but not least, and this is infused in the organization, is the spirit of generosity. We have a God who spoke the universe into being. What a generous thing. As Christians, we have a God who gives us God's Son for our salvation. So generosity is infused into the organization, and you want to seek people to be on your board who get that, who they see God as abundant, who they see not problems when they look at the organization, but they can see the possibilities within the organization. And so I spent probably more time on this slide than I will anything else, but this is the underpinning of all the work that I do with nonprofits. So we'll move on. This is a mini primer in the legal aspects if you're a board member of a 501c3. And if you talk to any attorney, they would say, yes, these 3 primary responsibilities, or they may call them fiduciary responsibilities, are really important. And by the way, if you've not heard that phrase before, don't feel bad. I think I had served on 3 boards over a period of maybe 10 years before I ever heard the term fiduciary responsibility. But it's really important. And I wish that I had known that a long time ago. The first is, I'm going to put all 3 of them up here, and then I'll talk about them briefly. Duty of loyalty. The second is called duty of responsibility and obedience. And the third is called duty of care. And in a nutshell, what that means is a board member can only act in the best interest of the organization. The organization has a mission statement or a vision statement that's printed. And if you don't, you have bylaws or a constitution that state your purpose, that state why you exist and who you serve. And that's essential to even get a nonprofit status from the IRS. And as a board member, you must always act to advance the mission and the impact of that organization, not in your own self-interest. And if there are conflicts of interest, you need to disclose those things. Several weeks ago, I was working with a group that does a food program, an after-school program in West Lawndale, which is near west side of Chicago. And they're a relatively new organization, and the chair of the board is a really good man who really doesn't understand much about this. He said yes because he cares. And the organization had hired his wife and his daughter part-time to do some of the after-school programming. And it wasn't like there was any insider dealing going on. But when we had this conversation about conflict of interest, he's like, wow, so is that a conflict of interest? I said, well, potentially it is. You know, did you hire them over somebody else who was more qualified? Or might this create an optics for the organization that makes it look like you're taking care of your own family and not the people that need to be served? So as a board member, you should disclose a potential conflict of interest. The board should discuss those things, and they may say, oh, that's okay. That doesn't seem to be, we're aware of that. Or they may say, you know what, we're uncomfortable with that situation. And so we're not going to, we don't want that to happen. Or perhaps, you know, you're on a board and you have a building and the building needs a new roof. And so you're like, I'm going to get my brother-in-law involved because he has a roofing company. Like be a conflict of interest. So you would be serving yourself or your family's interest, perhaps over the organization's. Duty of responsibility and obedience. You're a 501c3 or part of that. There are laws in the state of Wisconsin or Illinois or Michigan that state you need to do certain things. You know, if your budget is over a certain size, you must file a 990, which is the equivalent of a tax return, even though you don't pay taxes perhaps, but you still have to file a form. Duty of responsibility, you know, you get materials, you're on a committee about the budget or hiring someone, reviewing the materials, showing up understanding and ready to make responsible decisions for the organization. And then lastly, you have to care for the assets of the organization, the people, the reputation, the physical property. You know, if you're a board member at Wisconsin Lutheran College, you know, there's physical assets. There's a foundation with money in there. Those assets have to be well managed, prudently taken care of. The culture of the organization as well. So those are fiduciary responsibilities. And this all has to do with the culture. There's a phrase which you may have heard, which says, culture eats strategy for lunch. Culture eats strategy for lunch. That came out of the corporate world, but it's just as appropriate in the nonprofit or ministry world or congregations as well. And there's this triangular relationship between the board chair, the top CEO, senior pastor, executive director, and then the board. And so that triangular relationship between board chair, CEO, and the board is really critical at establishing a culture that's professional, follows best practices, transparent, trusting, willing to have hard conversations, and yet be respectful and letting go when you need to let go and that sort of thing. That really, really is vital. Mentioned the phrase strategy eats culture eats strategy for lunch. You can have a really good strategic plan with well-written goals, but if the culture is such that maybe you don't trust your boss, the goals just don't matter because then there's all these other things that set the parking brake. So in your bylaws or your committee structure, it probably says we can have 9 to 13 members, or we can have 10 to 17 members or whatever. And, you know, that's really valuable real estate. So if it says you can have 10 members, you want all 10 of them filled with people who are fully engaged, passionate about the organization, fitting the right type of a task skill set that you need in order to advance the organization to the next level. And so I want to spend this next section talking about recruitment, because if you recruit properly, that will take care of myriad other issues that may come up in the organization. And so here's a simple tool that a lot of not a lot, some organizations use in order to look for really quality people. So across the bottom, you see capacity. Well, what kind of capacity are you looking for? Do you need someone with legal, theological, nutrition, wealth, and willingness to give it? So they have that capacity from a little to a lot. Obviously, you want people on the a lot. And then, well, what's their interest like? Well, they may have a lot of that capacity, but if they don't really know about you or they don't really care about you, well, what difference does that make? So we're looking for people who have both capacity and interest. And I call this the outward view. In other words, we're looking out into the community or into the congregation to say, who could we recruit? Okay, but that's it's a two-dimensional tool, but this is a three-dimensional principle here. And that is that you still have this capacity and interest, but it's actually a three-dimensional activity in that the community also looks back in at you. And so who you recruit, there's a public trust element that goes on there. Some people would call that optics. Well, do you care about what the public thinks about you? Or do you care about what the congregation thinks about you? I hope that you do. And so, what type of track record does this person have? Do they have the respect of the community? So if we were to recruit them on, that would actually help us in terms of our inward view, people looking in at us. I'm not an expert at like search engine optimization on websites, but I have heard numerous times that one of the most commonly looked at pages on churches and nonprofits websites is they look at the About Us tab and they want to see who's the senior leadership, who's on the board. People are curious about who's in the leadership. And so thinking at an intentional level about who you're going to go after is really important. I want to give you some specific tools here. You probably, if you're older than 25, you probably remember this movie, The Right Stuff. You don't just want, William Shatner might disagree with this, but you don't just want anybody being an astronaut, okay? There's a real select group of people, and getting the right people on the board is also really important. So for successful board recruitment, let's not start with who. Oftentimes, the recruitment process kind of looks like how you would go after filling up the room moms or the room parents at your school, at your kid's school. It's like, who do we know? Who will say yes? That kind of feels like, who has a pulse? Who can we get to beyond this group? Susan's leaving. Will Fred say yes or whatever? So let's start with what. In other words, what is the best? What's the best thing that will advance the board, strengthen the board? Are we missing things on the board? I'll show you a matrix in just a second that some of my clients use. Once you determine strengths, assets, gaps of the board, we're not talking about the people, we're talking about what the board needs. Then you start to talk about who. And that's where you relentlessly look for the right stuff in those people. So then you determine, okay, this is what we need. So then this is who we think we need. And so then third is, how do we ask them? Who's going to go ask that people? So you want to be prepared. We'll talk a little bit about that in just a moment here. You want to send the very best people to recruit that person. And you want to send people that they can't say no to. So if you're really serious about getting the right people, you get prepared, do your homework, and then go ask with people who they would respect and not want to disappoint. So a lot of detail on this chart, but just to help you focus, if you look to the left side in the box there, a lot of organizations just start by making a list of names. All right, how about them? How about her? How about him? How about her? No. Let's start here at the top in the gold box, a rectangle. this is the what. So do we want gender balance? Do we want racial balance? What kind of skill sets do we need? This group uses a culture fit and a skill set. So that's really detailed. You don't have to go into that much detail, but wow, is it helpful if you do. So then you determine, what do we need? What do we have? What are we missing? Who do we know that can really fill those gaps that we're looking for? So if it's gender, or maybe you're like, we really need somebody on, maybe you're a food pantry and you don't have anybody on that really understands nutrition, or food deserts, or the clientele, or the region where the resources are. So you want that type of person. Okay. And then I'm going to be real nitty gritty here. Okay. Just the other night, I was on the phone with a board, and they're relatively new, and they want to add 2 more people to the board. And so we had a conversation that started with what's in this right here under characteristics, which was like, what kind of a person do we really want? See, this is determining the what, not the who. And you can see they want a person that lives with the spirit of generosity. They want people who are passionate about our mission. They want people who are networked and connected, strategic thinker, Christian faith, fundraising. So these are the characteristics that they're after. All right. Then they got their lens focused. Then they went to, well, who do we know? And so these are the people that they knew and that they felt. And then, for example, let's say that I was on that board and I brought Tim's name to the board. Well, I also brought a little bio of Tim. Then we discussed Tim and these others. And then the X's here, this is really getting into the weeds here. But then the committee voted and they said, who do we think after all this conversation? And Ryan and Tony got the most votes. And so people on the board whose initials are here, they said, we know them, we'll go talk to them. And so that got him, that went from way up in the clouds here of like, what do we need, down into who are they, to who's going to go make that ask. Here's another tool. By the way, you know what? I want to pause here for a second because I've been racing for almost half of our time. Michelle, are you out there somewhere? Do we have any questions along the way?
Yes, I'm here. We do have a question.
Sure.
It is, can you speak to why it's valuable or not valuable to have rules for securing board spots, such as 40% or more will be women? It seems very valuable, yet can be kind of tokenizing. Is the
that's a good question, particularly when you got to the very last word, tokenizing. So many boards right now are talking about diversity, equity, gender. And so they're like, oh, we're just a bunch of old white Lutherans on our board. And we don't want to be old white Lutherans. And the board realizes that. So how do you dip your toe into that area, becoming more diverse? So let's say you find someone in your area, a strong Black woman business person, and you're like, how do we bring that conversation to her in a way that doesn't make it feel like it's token? You know, and I think it's, and she won't want to be on the board if she feels that it's token. So is the board genuinely, the organization genuinely committed to this for the long haul? Are you willing to realize that some people are going to throw rocks at you? And are you willing to have a transparent conversation with that person or persons about how you've not done this well in the past and you want to do it better, and you want to, so you have to be willing to get out of your comfort zone. And that's a culture shift. And some people inside and outside aren't necessarily going to like that, but for the sake of the organization, you have to be willing to have those hard conversations and willing for the long haul to do that. So there was another part of the question around like rules and regulations. You know, Michelle, would you mind reading the question again?
Sure. All right, let me just scroll through and find it down here. So, valuable or not valuable to have rules for securing board spots, such as 40% are X, Y, and Z. So I think that was kind of the rule around it.
Okay. Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense to have some type of policy about how you're going to manage the membership of your own board, not so it looks good, but so it functions well. There's all kinds of research and experience now that shows that diverse boards make better decisions. They care more for the community when you recruit sensitively and intentionally. There's like a simple thing like term limits on a board. What will that do for you? How do you leverage something like that so it's good for the board? There are people that argue that boards shouldn't have terms, but that's not my decision here or there today. So this is go back to my second slide with the 7 Gs. This is the generative part and governing part of being smart and being intentional about getting people on the board who are willing to have these kinds of conversations to help the senior pastor or the executive director or whatever think through issues like this. It's not easy, time consuming, yes. And when you are, like we had this, I'm going to jump back to a slide here. If you were to take, instead of intention and capacity, and let's think about recruiting people to the board, and let's replace these with challenge, and invitation. Challenge and invitation. When boards bring people on and give them meaty things to deal with, challenging, invitation, it takes time, it takes brain energy, brain power to do this. They find that meaningful and engaging. People don't want to be on a board that's easy, then you lose them. And so when they see that what they're doing is valuable, it's not always easy. Sometimes there's a lot of conflict within boards because they're dealing with challenging issues, but worthwhile when you invite them in. I think congregations that ask a lot of their people are generally more fun, more interesting, higher impact than those that we hope they just show up. But let's be intentional about what it means to be the people of God in this community. So I hope that
we actually had two. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
We had 2 other questions come through, and now actually another one. So I'm just gonna through these. If you want to take another minute, is that
sure?
Okay? You keep going. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So going back to this matrix that you showed, it seems like the characteristics you have here are transferable to almost any organization. What are the characteristics that every board should have, no matter the context? That they're like really every board should have.
Yeah. So the short answer is that's for the board to decide. Even if you look at those and go, wow, I'd like to have all of those on our board. So if you're the executive director and you just plop that up in front of your board, you might love it. They have no ownership in that. So even if you know those characteristics that you want on there, it's worth it to let the board wrestle with that on their own, just like as if you had a strategic plan and you already know what the big 4 goals are for the next couple of years. You got to provide a space for the board to have that discussion so they can own it, and then they can have the backbone and the passion in order to really work hard on those things. So don't just hand it to them. That's the easy, quick way. And short-term gain usually means long-term pain. And the opposite of that is true also. Short-term pain usually means long-term gain. So let the board or a committee of the board, if you have a really big board, a committee of the board wrestle with those characteristics and come up with their own. And they might change over time as well. Okay, was there another question?
There's another one.
Okay.
And I am very curious as the answer to this one as well. So if you have a limited pool of people to recruit, or you can someone that fits the characteristics you're looking for, is it better to leave the spot open or fill it with someone that is willing but doesn't have the skills you want or need?
Ask another question.
That's a hard one.
That is a really good
question.
So let's say that you, like years ago, some of you might know Wheat Ridge Ministries. I was on their staff for a little over 10 years. We had 4-year terms. and you could serve 2 4-year terms consecutively. So do you want to recruit someone for 4 years knowing that they're not really a good fit? I look at this recruiting like professional baseball teams. They don't wait until the shortstop, throws his arm out and then go look for another shortstop. They always have a list of a half a dozen or 10 or 12 shortstops that they're looking at all the time. And so that's the importance of doing this hard work ahead of time. I would be very, very reluctant to hire someone that I didn't feel was going to be able to hit the ball, to use the baseball analogy. I'd rather leave the term, the seat empty for the near term. Maybe in 6 months, somebody else would come up, or a year you'd come up. Getting the wrong person on the board is like if you know your grandma's cookie recipe and you pull out one of those important ingredients and put a different ingredient in, it will not be grandma's cookies. And you will not be, none of your relatives will be happy with that either. So I'd rather just let the seat stay open. I'll give you an example of another organization that I'm very familiar with. I'll leave them nameless for right now, but several years ago, they had a new executive director who went to the board and said, we have a committee structure that fits the old strategic plan. This new strategic plan, this board's committee structure just isn't working. And there was a really high degree of trust. And at the next meeting, they had a very engaging conversation and voted to disband the committee structure, which was pretty fast moving for boards. And at the next board meeting, they voted to make the board from 8. They took it down. They were at 18. They voted to go down to 7 or 8 board members. And then with the intent that they were going to figure this out and then rebuild the board over a period of years in a structure and size that fit what they needed to meet their strategic plan. So longer answer than maybe what you wanted, but I hope that's helpful. So another question? Or should we move on?
It for
okay,
now.
All right,
yep,
good.
Because I have
okay, and we have about 20 minutes, is that right?
Yes, we will be done at 10:55.
Okay, good. Because I have a few slides, and then we'll take some more time at the end for other questions there. So good. Thanks for your questions. I appreciate them, even though they're hard to answer. So we looked at this nitty gritty. Let's look at one other aspect of how you track who's on the board. So this is I made up this chart. The names are all people that I know, but the application is one that I took from a former client that I thought was just excellent. So they track when the person comes on the board. This happens to be an organization where you serve 4-year terms, and you can serve 2 4-year terms. So let's look, for example, the blue, like number 4, Susan Anderson. She served 4-year term, and then in 2022, so this next year, she'll start her second 4-year term. So as long as things go well, then N, the green, is new. That's when someone new has to come on the board. So as they go into 2022, no one new is coming onto the board. But in 2023, they have 2 seats that will be empty. So they need to be thinking about replacing number 9, Sandy Stice, and they need to be thinking about replacing number 12, Erica Lyles. So are they concerned about gender balance? Well, they're losing 2 women. Okay, so that might be something that they need to be concerned about. Here's something that I think is really interesting. So let's say that Kevin Schrader, Martin Hoyman, Sandy Stice, and Erica Lyles, of the dozen board members, 4 of them are going to go off in a 2-year period, in 2022 and 2023. 4 of them are going off. Let's say that this is a food pantry with a $200,000 budget. And let's say that those 4 people give $80,000 a year to the organization. Those 4 are the biggest philanthropists to the food pantry. And so over a 2-year period, you're going to lose $80,000 of revenue of your $200,000 budget. Does that make paying attention to who rolls off and the type of skills they have really important? Absolutely. Because if they're not careful about keeping those 4 board members engaged at a high level after they go off the board, including their giving, and bringing on people that also have capacity or elevating current board members to a higher level, if you lose 40% of your giving capacity over a 2-year period, it could be devastating for the organization. So that's one example. It could also be legal skill, marketing skill, programming expertise, governance, leadership. So just paying attention to who's coming on, who's going off, what kind of skills do they have, and then going back to that matrix. And by the way, one of my clients, it's a fine arts organization in the Chicagoland area. On their potential list, they probably have 20 names of potential board members. And then another thing that they do is they start inviting those 20 people to their events. Because they're fine arts, they do concerts and recitals and plays and parades and things like that. So they invite all those people. By the way, none of these people know they're on the potential list. And that's a confidential issue that's never discussed outside of a board meeting. So just so you're aware of how they handle that. And then as they invite these people to events the year or 2 years before, they see who gets engaged, who starts to give, who's really interested. And so it's a way of developing a pipeline in. You may never ask all of these or any of these people to be on the board, but you're inviting them in for a look. And it's kind of like courting and seeing who you like to date and who you want to create a really long-term relationship with over a long period of time. So that's one of the most important best practices in developing the leadership capacity of your board. So a lot of organizations talk about best practices and they're like, yes, we're professional, we use best practices. And then if you ask them, well, what do you mean by best practices? Some of them are like, well, I'm not really sure what best practices are. So I'm going to show you a handful of them. And some of them you may be doing, some you may be like, oh, what does that mean to be applying these things? So I'll just give you a second to absorb this. There's a lot on the screen at the moment. Some of these items are required if you're a 501c3. You should do an audit. It should be approved by the board. If you have a revenue, I think it's of over 50,000 a year, you should file a 990. That should be approved by the board, or at least a finance committee of the board that has that fiduciary responsibility. You notice number 4 has an asterisk by it, board self-assessment evaluation. That's a tough one to put into place if you've never had it. In other words, the board is going to evaluate itself, and we are going to evaluate individual members of the board. And so you have to carefully, sensitively design an evaluation process that doesn't feel like you're, judging them with the law, yet encourages them to be engaged. And that one has an asterisk by it, because in my opinion, of working with boards for a long time, it has the potential to strengthen your board as much as anything else on this list. Budget approval is required. Executive director evaluation, it's required. A lot of organizations don't do that. Conflict of interest, document storage and destruction, things like that should be handled on a regular basis. Number 14, onboarding process. When somebody comes on new, do they have an orientation that's such that they walk into that first board meeting and they're not going to be an expert, but they'll know what's going to be expected of them. And then number 13, this development recruitment packet, you can solve a lot of problems by letting a person know during the recruitment process what the organization is all about. You educate them. How many meetings a year? Do we have a giving policy? What's our strategic plan? So that way they know the type of vision and direction and expectations that are expected of all board members. They know what they're saying yes to and otherwise. So, and The best nonprofits, they bake those best practices right into the calendar. For example, let's say you meet 6 times a year. So you know that in February, you're going to review the budget and that the next meeting you'll approve it, or you're going to look at the 990, or you're going to have an annual meeting and elect new officers. So those things are just in the calendar and you're not hitting and missing them by chance. So really important. You can make the board really strong, improve the leadership capacity by baking the best practices right into the calendar. And then that's a discipline between the board chair and the top staff person, senior pastor or executive director or president or whatever you call that person. So if a board member says, I've never done this before, help me know how to be a good board member. What do I need to do? I'm going to run through this. So if that board packet is well put together, that'll give them really clear guidelines around what does the bylaws say? Is there a board job description that's, talks about number of meetings and expectations? Is there a calendar of events that we want people to attend? How big is the budget? What's the audit look like? Have we been in the red? Have we been in the black? Are we growing? Are we shrinking? What's our strategic plan? Directory, who else is on the board? Where are they from, etc. Responsiveness, very important that when, if the executive director is emailing or texting board members, that they're responsive and they get back to them in a reasonable amount of time. Or if they're sending materials out, that they really dig into those materials and show up to board meetings prepared and ready to make part of that fiduciary responsibility. You do board business at board meetings. In other words, you stay out of the weeds. It's very annoying for staff when board members try to do their job for them. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a second, but stay out of the weeds and stay on the rails. If the agenda says we're talking about the fundraising campaign, don't get asking tons of questions about nitty-gritty things that are not on that topic. So that's one of the best ways to do board business at board meetings. And if you have other questions about other things, do that outside of the board meeting. And the board chair, I'd recommend the board chair get coached or go to a conference on how to be a good board chair, so they can realize when things are on the rails or off or in the weeds or not. Confidentiality. Do you talk about donors or who you're recruiting, or are there ethical issues in the organization? And so, or financial challenges, and how do you handle that tether between transparency and confidentiality and those sensitive issues? It's not easy. It's not easy, but it's an important thing to balance. Board culture. Is there a culture of, being respectful and being direct at board meetings, saying it now, what's on your mind, and then letting go? Because you speak as a board, you speak as an individual board member during the meeting, but then outside of the board meeting, you should speak with one voice about the decisions that the board members make. An example, a couple of weeks ago, I was facilitating a meeting and the board was putting into policy a safety policy because they do after school care for kids. And this was new for them. And so they were talking about like background checks for their tutors and that sort of thing. And there was one board member who, as they voted to approve this policy, he said, I just want to be clear, I'm not voting yes on this today. I'm voting no on this today. They voted and it was like 12-1. And then afterwards he said, we definitely need a policy. And so I didn't want to stop us from approving the policy, but I think the policy is weak and I think that it needs to be improved. So we need it, but I don't want this to be our final policy in place. So he had the, courage to say, I'm voting against this and we need to keep working on that, and then let go of it. He wasn't mad or upset that he didn't get his way, but was willing to then speak with one voice outside of the board meeting. And then lastly here, clarity about the difference between the board's role, the committee's role, and staff functions. Let me give you a little bit more about that. So you maybe have seen these terms before: conceptual, strategic, and operational or tactical. We think in different levels, and some of us are better at conceptual thinking than we are operational thinking. Some of us are better at strategic thinking than we are at the others. And as a it's nothing right or wrong, that's just how God wired us. But as boards function, generally, boards function in that conceptual organizational strategy level. And then there's committee and staff work that happens on the programmatic strategy level. And then in the operational and tactical area, that's generally staff. It could be that you, as a board member, serve as a volunteer, but you take off your board hat if you're going to, go and set up chairs for a parade or an event or something like that. So this is maybe a way, it's not neat and tidy like this, but in general, if you can think about the board's work in the conceptual realm of strategy, vision, problem solving, vision casting, goal setting, and then I had a slide that looks like an hourglass where the board is the sand in the top of the hourglass. The executive director or the senior pastor is in that where how the sand gets through, and then the staff and the volunteers and all that are in the bottom where all the programmatic rubber hits the road sort of a thing there. So, okay, we have a couple of minutes left. As the pendulum swings back, I'm talking about pandemic. We have, on top of pandemic, we had, like, I've never seen in my 6 decades of life, the type of political, racial, economic impact in the last couple of years. I mean, talk about upheaval. And so as we swing back, I'm thinking, what can you go back to your own organization and think, what are the most important things we need to act on in order to strengthen our board? Because as the board goes, so will go the organization. So Michelle, we have some more comments or questions here?
We do have a question. It's, how do you convince burned out leaders to reach out to new members other than announcing a need from the lectern?
Yeah. Great question. So this is a congregation focused question. One, speaking from, how do you convince burned out leaders? Read it again, please. I just want to make sure I got it right, Michelle.
Yes. How do you convince burned out leaders to reach out to new members?
That's probably not a good idea to have a burned out leader reach out to new members, because they will project need. They will project negativity. So that probably didn't help you answer your question, but if you have a burned out leader who's a volunteer, one of the best ways to get out of the burnout is to go and put your hands on where the ministry really happens. So if you have a really great after school program that serves teenagers or junior high kids, go and serve them. Go put your fingers, be the hands and feet of Jesus, not from 100 miles away or from conversation. Go put your hands on it and see why it's so important. And then you're able to speak from impact, not need. Asking people to serve or to give because you need it, no, it doesn't work. Or if people respond, they're like, okay, I'll respond out of guilt, not out of generosity and not out of joy and satisfaction, but to get rid of you. So go and serve and see, and then tell your story. Tell your story. Don't talk about why the budget is short. Talk about how you're serving and how you're making a difference. Stories of impact. Those are energizing, motivating, and talk about how God is being generous through the hands and feet of the people. The second thing is perhaps that person needs to step back and let someone else come into the leadership position. Burned out leaders, even the pastors and the youth workers and that are burned out, they need a break. They need sabbatical. They need silence. They're probably burned out because they're misaligned. They're trying to do things that don't align with their own skills and values, or they're trying to do everything themselves. or they shouldn't be, or they're not resting. Jesus was a marvelous example of the importance of congregation, the importance of community, the importance after almost every big miracle that Jesus did, he went away. It was a great example of do something, rest, pray, repeat. Do something, rest, pray, repeat. So, and we're not good at that in the church. We are not good at that in the church. And so it may be time for that person to just step away for a period of time. And if they can't, speak from impact, not from need. So.
We have another question, and this is coming from the perspective of the person thinking about their church. So we have a board where we meet every month, and 90% of what we talk about is tactical, not strategic. Yet our vision team, how do we move from tactical, like volunteering at the event this weekend, to strategic? And what are really the first and second steps you need to take to do that?
Yeah. So if the organization doesn't have, they have a vision committee, well, then they probably have a vision statement. But if they don't, and they don't have a plan, they don't have a strategic plan that has, like, in the next 3 years, we want to accomplish this, then they will probably wander from one emergency to the next, one problem to the next, one event to the next, which is a little bit like, shotgun approach versus bow and arrow. These are our most important organizational priorities. And so board meetings in an ideal situation are the top executive, senior pastor, executive director, the board chair, who get together ahead of time and say, okay, what's our agenda going to look like? And let's make sure that we're focusing on the strategic issues we have all this brain trust around the table. Let's use them for that generative strategic kind of conversation. And the tactics have to fall into staff or into the committees and that type of thing, and trust people. If the board thinks they need to discuss all the tactics, that's not really leadership. That's management. The definition of the words, management is controlling the details of what is, and leadership is advancing and thinking new and innovative about how to increase our impact or change direction in that. And so changing the format of the agendas is a very nitty-gritty thing, which can then change the conversation. And having a board chair that keeps the conversation out of the weeds is really important, really important. Challenging. That's a culture change as well. Some people don't even realize they're doing that. By the way, I mentioned there's conceptual, operational, and tactical thinkers. About 80% of the American population, guess what? They're tactical. They don't normally go into the conceptual realm, and we like to solve problems, which tends to almost always drop into the weeds.
Great. Well, we are running out of time. We only have about a minute left, so we're going to close this session shortly. But Brian, are there any closing words you'd like to leave us with today?
Yes. It is never too late to take the first step in the right direction. Okay, it's never too late to take the first step in the right direction. And if you, I know my materials are there. If anybody wants to follow up with an email or later on and have a conversation about some of these things, I'm happy to do that. And so know that God wants you to see the world as an abundant and generous place. And yeah, I'll leave it at that. Never too late to take the first step in the right direction.
Well, Brian, we are so blessed to have you with us today. What
My pleasure.
Great wealth of information, and just Thanks. A reminder that Brian's PowerPoint deck is available in a PDF on his session page. So the matrix, like all those great tools you shared and the resources are there for you. We also have a launch chat area of the website, and there is a thread for talking about leadership capacity there. We have a few sessions under that theme. So if you want to continue the conversation with the other people that attended this session or the session yesterday about leadership, please jump over there and chat your thoughts and comments and any insights you have. But with that, I'm going to end the session, and thank you so much, Brian, and we will hopefully see you again.
Thanks for having me. Blessings,
care.
everybody.
Bye-bye.